Why'd I gotta see you dancing in the courtyard?
Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Canadian jazz vocalist Caity Gyorgy. She is well on her way with her debut 2021 CD called No Bounds. This Toronto and Montreal-based vocalist is known for singing bebop and swing music. Already, she has worked and recorded with many luminaries in the Canadian jazz scene, like Allison Au, LaBarbera, Jocelyn Gould, and the great Pat Collins. Her passion and drive is something you should hear. Enjoy the interview.
Thanks for taking a minute out.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You bet. So your debut album, No Bounds, comes out probably at one of the most unique times on planet Earth. We've just gotten on the other side of a pandemic, no live music. Talk to me a little bit about this coming out right now, pretty much on the cusp of everything becoming a revival and things getting back to live status.
It was a weird decision to make because I wanted to release it earlier in November, but I'm in Canada and our restrictions were very, very strict. And so I wanted to do some sort of release show, and in November I realized, you know what, it's not going to happen. So I'm just going to push it to January. If things are good in January, awesome. If things aren't, then we're just going to move on to the next album. It was pretty good. I'm happy with the response from the record, and I love all the feedback I got, and I released it independently, so it was a huge learning curve. I just finished my bachelor's degree, so I'm coming out of jazz school with not as much knowledge as I should have had while releasing a record independently. But I'm really happy with how it went. But, in January it was released. I let it out into the world, and then I focused on the next project, which actually comes out tomorrow, tonight at midnight. So lots of records happening right now.
What are you hoping as fans and listeners, especially in the world of jazz, get baptized with your son? What are you hoping they get from your music and from your new albums? I
hope they enjoy the compositions. I do a lot of my own writing, and I've written lots of songs, and I've released lots of my own original songs, and I love when people cover them, and a few people have performed my songs at gigs all across the world, which is super exciting for me. So I hope they enjoy the writing. A lot of people will ask me, who wrote this song? And they'll talk about my song Postage Due or a certain someone, and I'm like, oh, that's me. That's my song. So I love when that happens, because it kind of gives me the sense of fulfillment that I've, done my job as a songwriter, where you can't tell that it's not a song from the jazz repertoire. And so I hope people like the songwriting, and I also hope people enjoy the scatting, because that's something I'm super passionate about. I love to improvise. I've transcribed 200 jazz solos to get my language chops up, and transcribing is something I've really worked on, and it's helped with my soloing a lot. So in No Bounds, I scat a bit, and then this next record, not as much, but in the next album that I'm recording, I'm going into the studio in a couple weeks to record my next album, which is going to be 12 songs long, and there's going to be lots of scatting on that one, and 10 out of the 12 songs are original compositions. So I hope when people listen to me, they enjoy the composition and the improvising.
So talk to me a little bit about where you were born and raised and kind of how the seeds of jazz began for you.
I was born and raised in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, which is not exactly a jazz place. It's more country. We have the Calgary Stampede, which is a big rodeo show. Lots of fun. But I didn't really come to jazz until I was in grade 11. In high school, I joined the jazz choir. I joined the jazz choir because I really wanted to sing Motown music, which was my passion at that time. And jazz was closer to Motown than the chamber choir music we were doing. So I joined the jazz choir, and I was learning a few songs. It was mostly All of Me, or some Jobim tunes, and then a bunch of Beatles medleys. So not exactly the most deep dive into the jazz world, but it was still helpful. And then at the end of my grade 11 year, when I was 17, I met a boy who is a jazz drummer. He sort of got me into jazz more because I wanted to date him, and I found that if I want to be able to talk about stuff, music is a really good thing to talk about, and he likes music and I like music, and then I ended up just taking a huge, I dove headfirst into the world of jazz, and at first I didn't always like what I heard, so I took a deep dive, and I was listening to a lot of different kinds of music within the jazz genre, and a lot of it I liked, and a lot of it I didn't like at first. I remember buying Birth of the Cool at a record shop, And I went home and I listened to it, and I didn't understand it at all. I didn't get it. It was not one of my favorite records at the time. But now I love it. Now it's one of my favorites. So I started off with people like Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, and I learned a bunch of Ella solos, like the one on How High the Moon and Airmail Special and Blue Skies. And so I was doing a little bit of like transcribing when I was around 17, but only just because I listened to these recordings so many times. As the years progressed, I kind of got more into instrumental music, and now I'd say I listen primarily to instrumental music. I listen to a lot of Stitt, and I listen to a lot of Bird and Clifford Brown and Amon Duval. You know, there's so many players that I love so much, especially OP. I love Oscar Peterson. And he's Canadian, which is cool. I guess now I'm super into everything, but when I first started at 17, I could not, like, I listened to Giant Steps, I didn't get it. I listened to Miles Davis, didn't get it. So it took me a while to develop the taste that I have now. And now I can't get enough of all of it.
What was the first live jazz show you saw that really blew you down and made you think, wow, this is something I would love to do?
Oh, that's a really good question. I guess when I was in high school, the Village Vanguard Orchestra came to my city. They were just doing a tour of Canada, and I went and saw the music, and they played a bunch of the Thad Jones charts. And oh my God, it was amazing. I went twice. I got tickets for the next day as well, just because I was so blown away. And they didn't have a singer, but I thought the music was so beautiful, and I couldn't believe it. Just so many instruments playing together so beautifully. And of course, I've heard classical music before at that point, but just the swing feel and the energy of the group and everybody's like solos, it blew my mind. I couldn't believe it.
So you've worked with the likes of Pat LaBarbera and Jocelyn Gould and Pat Collins. You've been around some pretty esteemed veteran players. What have you learned from them that's in turn helped you as you approach the bandstand?
Oh my gosh, I owe so much to all of my mentors and people like that. Pat LaBarbera has been like so incredibly generous, and you know, Pat, I was in his ensemble when I was at Humber when I was in my second year, and one day he said, "Okay, like come to my office later and bring your hard drive. I'm going to give you a bunch of singers." And so I brought my hard drive, and he filled it up with all of these recordings of like incredible singers. You got Bobby Darin, Diana Krall, Petula Clark, lots of Keely Smith. Like there's so many singers. And so I started listening to a lot of that, and it was really, like, that was super inspiring for me to have a teacher that was like, okay, here's a bunch of stuff. You got to listen to all of this. And then when I entered into a Hank Mobley phase for a while, and I was listening to a whole bunch of Mobley, and Pat said, okay, well, bring your hard drive again, and I'm going to give you some Mobley. And so I got my hard drive filled up with some Hank Mobley as well. And that was really fantastic. And I was supposed to be doing a recording with Pat, but the pandemic kind of messed that up a little bit. But in the drives to some of the rehearsals, I would just ask Pat questions about what it was like to work with certain people. And, you know, I found out his first gig with the Buddy Rich Big Band was with Frank Sinatra, and, you know, like, working with all these incredible singers and musicians, and, like, it's just so inspiring to me to have, like, a connection sort of to the players that I really, like Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald. They're larger than life to me. So, you know, having a mentor who's played with these people and is so deep into the tradition is really inspiring for me to want to learn more of the music and more of the history. And then with Jocelyn, Jocelyn played on my record No Bounds, and she's guesting on my next record, which I'm recording in a couple weeks. And Jocelyn has been just so fantastic. We talk a lot about just being a woman in this music, and it's really nice to have a person that understands what it's like and, you know, has a love for the music like I do. And she's always been so supportive. And, you know, I was in my fourth year of college, and she just started teaching at Humber. She's the head of the guitar department. And I took a leap and I said, hey, would you be interested in recording some songs with me? And she's like, okay. And so, you know, just having that, like, she's so, like, open-minded and so supportive and wonderful. And I appreciate her taking the time and using her time to record with me, because I mean, she's so fantastic and she's very busy and wonderful. But, you know, like, I'm so grateful for her for the support, not only like as like another musician, but as a woman in the music. And I've had so many incredible teachers over the years, and they've all been like incredibly supportive. And, you know, within my music school education, especially at Humber College where I went for my undergrad, people were always like very encouraging, and they always gave me such incredible recommendations for music. And I really can't thank my professors there enough, because I really enjoyed it.
So now that, the dream has come to fruition, what do you like the best about being a professional musician?
Well, I mean, now that gigs are starting to come back, I am loving the fact that I'm getting booked all over the country in Canada. I'd love to be performing in the States, but the borders aren't open yet. So hopefully one day we can plan a tour down there. But performing is my favorite thing to do, and so I've got a bunch of gigs booked this summer, and I really can't wait. I'm going to be touring some of the music that I've written, and I'm recording more music, and so I guess the thing I love most about being a performer is being able to share my music, no matter if it's like recording the music or if it's writing the music or if it's, like actually playing the music to an audience. I think it's very special to be able to share my artistic voice with an audience who's prepared to listen and to sit and to enjoy.
When we do return and we kind of get back into earnest, what do you hope both the audience and the musicians, the singers and instrumentalists realize about the power of live music since we've been away from it for so long?
Well, I mean, I've played a couple gigs in Canada that are live, and I actually went to a jam session last night in Montreal, and it was packed. So I think that, people are extremely grateful for it to be back, but, I'm hoping there's a little bit of a cultural shift within live music because, I played a lot of gigs for tips, and now I'm not doing that as much, but, I think live music is something it's so valuable, and I think we realized that a lot when we were watching it from a screen instead of in a bar. So I hope that people, really realize that we put our hearts and souls into this music, and, being able to perform it to an audience it's such a privilege. And I think it goes both ways, though. I think it's a privilege to be able to listen to live music, and it's a privilege to be able to make live music. And so I hope there's a greater respect from both ends, like a respect for the audience coming out to support and a respect for the musicians sharing their voices with everybody. So, yeah, but I hope that everybody is just as excited as I am for the music to return.
Yeah, I know I am. So why do you love jazz?
I think I love the challenge of it. I love the improvisation so much, and I really like that you never know what's going to happen. And that sounds very cliche, but when you're on the bandstand and the bass catches what the drums is doing, and then they lock in, and then it's just there's so much potential to the music for it to be so fun to play, and I love that people. It's just such a listening music, not only just from the audience's point of view, but from the band as well. And there's a language to music, and so if you're listening and you pick up on the language, you can respond to it. And I think that's when a lot of the best music happens. I guess I love that you never know what's going to happen, though. So, I mean, you always have to be listening. Yeah, I think improvising has been one of my greatest joys in experiencing this music, and it's a challenge, and I love getting to learn how to do it and getting to do it. And I love when it's hard to explain. It's a very deep question, but I think I love when things lock and when the band is swinging and everybody's sounding good. That's very simple, but I'm not sure there's another way to put it.
You had a dream show that you could go see and get into a time machine. Where are you going to go? Who would you want to see live?
Oh my gosh. That's tough. I think I would love to see Sarah's performance at Mr. Kelly's, like the Live at Mr. Kelly's record. I would love to see that live. But I'd also, if I had the opportunity to see Bird perform, even just at some sort of jam session, I think I'd probably die and go to heaven. That's a really tough. I'd also want to see Ella as well. Especially I think it would be so fun to hear her with the Basie Big Band. I don't know, or Anita at Newport. That would be really fun too. Or Ella at Newport when she does the really long airmail special scat solo. Oh, there's so many concerts that I would have loved to see. It's really tough to do.
Everyone has a perception or an idea of who they think you are. Your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. Who do you think you are?
Well, I consider myself just. Oh, that's another very loaded question. I think of myself as a musician. It's what I do. I have side hustles as everybody does these days, but at the end of the day, I am nothing but a musician. I live, I breathe, I speak music. I sing every day. You can barely get me to shut up most days. I'm always singing. So, yeah, I would say I'm a musician.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. That's a great way to wrap everything up. Thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest singers in Toronto, Montreal, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Caity for her time, music, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Gotta see you dancing around the fountain with her.
Neon Jazz.